LoveLore Library. Chapter 488. Mr. Tang, who had always been noble, called out in a low voice, "Chi-Chi. Who asked you to be so childish?" She still rubbed it gently and blew on it before getting down. "I'm going to cook." Just as she was about to leave, he caught her little hand. His grip was a little tight. Pei Chi-Chi turned her head and looked at Tang Yu. "What's wrong?" His gaze was fixed on her little face for a long time before he said softly, "Nothing." Pei Chi-Chi did not leave immediately. After a while, she lay in front of him again. "Tang Yu, I knew you liked me." She looked at him with her eyes wide open. Tang Yu patted her. "Shameless little girl, go and cook." She went obediently. On such a night, she was unbelievably soft. She had never thought that one day, she would make such a decision and have the courage to be with Tang Yu. But she really did not want to miss out on him. Chopping vegetables, boiling soup, stir-frying vegetables, all the dishes were fragrant and soft. A bowl of rice for 2 people. One bed, 2 people sleeping together. Late at night, Tang Yu sat with his shirt down to his waist. Pei Chi-Chi knelt behind him with a medical kit in her hand. She looked at the bruises and her heart ached. "Tang Yu." She called him like a kitten. He grunted. "Chi-Chi, you can apply more force." She did not dare to apply force. His back was already sweating even though she was applying the medicine carefully. It was clearly painful, but she had to pretend that nothing was wrong. She pursed her lips and did not dare to make a sound. But Tang Yu still knew that she was crying. He smiled warmly. "Chi-Chi, kiss me and it won't hurt anymore." He was actually just teasing her, but he didn't expect that his little one would really, very seriously climb onto his shoulder, and then he felt her little mouth gently touching his back. It was a little cold and a little hot, Chi-Chi. His voice was unbelievably hoarse as he called her name. Pei Chi-Chi nodded and kissed him a few more times. Her voice was a little warm. "Does it still hurt?" Tang Yu pulled the little thing over and held it in his arms. Her hair was as black as ink, and her face was at the prime of her youth. At this moment, she was blooming in his arms. Tang Yu lowered his head slowly and kissed her lightly. He gently sucked on her rosy lips and touched them lightly. His scorching hot breath blew on the side of her face. The warmth of his body and the bulging muscles made her blush and her heart race. Pei Chi-Chi bit him, her expression a little fragile. "Tang Yu." He hugged her like a little doll, just like how he used to hug her. He coaxed her gently, "Be good, I'll just kiss you. I can't do anything I want to do." She looked at his Adam's apple, which was rolling up and down. It was especially sexy. Moreover, she could clearly feel the changes in his body. Pei Chi-Chi bit her little mouth, buried her face in his arms and said a few words in a low voice. Tang Yu closed his eyes. "Chi-Chi." She had already buried her head. He never knew that she had such a hobby. He wanted to stop her, but there were too many things piling up and he could not control them. The moonlight was clear and the hospital bed was messy. She bent over in his arms, her back pressed against his slightly hot body. Tang Yu patted her back gently, coaxing her to sleep as if he was coaxing a baby. Chapter 489. "Tang Yu, can we really be together?" In the darkness, Pei Chi-Chi's voice was very soft and fragile. He reached out to touch her little head and pressed his chin against the top of her head. "Yes, Miss Pei." She rubbed her little face against him a little proudly and didn't say anything else after she let out a cry. Her face was a little warm against his arm, and her back was also indescribably warm. She felt like crying again. Her voice was a little dry and hoarse. "Tang Yu, I think I'm very selfish." He hugged her tighter, holding her small body in his arms. kissing her again and again. I only hope that you can be more selfish. She turned around and hugged him, hugging him like a child. You're already so big, but you're still like a child. His voice was warm as he looked down at her little head. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was vague in his arms. Tang Yu, I just want to feel your warmth. He did not say anything else. He just hugged her and kissed her little neck. When she was about to fall asleep, Tang Yu leaned against her ear and said in a low voice, Chi-Chi, thank you for being so brave. She woke up and hugged him tighter. She was very restless in his arms. Chi-Chi, if you continue like this, I can't guarantee what will happen. He patted her restless little body. However, she was still hugging him and was very restless. Tang Yu was very distressed. It was sweet and sour at the same time. After a while, he coaxed her. Chi-Chi, can you sit on me? No. She laughed in his arms, and her little hands were on fire as she teased him. Tang Yu finally knew that she was doing it on purpose. Chi-Chi. He called her name in a low voice, and there was a clear light in his dark eyes that was unique to men when they were asking for sex. Even she felt a little weak at the knees when she saw that. Then, she hugged him shamelessly. Tang Yu, you're injured. Then why are you still teasing me like this? He angrily bit her. He really wanted her. The naughty baby whispered in his ear for a while, and the injured man couldn't fall asleep even more. He gazed at her with his clear eyes and pinched her little face. Don't go back on your words in the future. She howled and hugged him. Tang Yu, when you were fighting with Qin Anlin at all costs, when you were being punished by the family rules, if I could still remain indifferent, I think I don't love you enough. Now, I'm back. And you still love me. She leaned into his chest, her little hand lightly touching his face, and then burying herself in his chest again. Tang Yu, let's live together with Tang Xian, okay? He reached out his hand to stroke her long hair and lightly grunted. When he looked down again, she had already fallen asleep, really, a child. In fact, she always pretended to be old, but she was still only 21 years old and could be considered a child. Chi-Chi, I'm sorry. He hugged her. I'm sorry for being so bad to you before. Early in the morning, Grandpa Lin came to see his seriously injured grandson. The nurse opened the door and said softly, Mr. Tang is not awake yet. He was not awake. It was not that he was not awake, but he was still sleeping soundly with a baby in his arms. Lin Yun also came with Grandpa Lin, and the two of them never expected such a scene. However, they were both thousand-year-old foxes. They immediately guessed why Tang Yu insisted on being hospitalized. Chapter 490. Lin Yun took Tang Yu's face into consideration. Moreover, there was still Pei Chi-Chi. She was still a young girl. Although she still had that thing in her heart, she never liked to embarrass others. However, old Master Lin didn't have that kind of moral integrity. He hit the ground with his walking stick. Is this a hospital or a hotel? Tang Yu was the first to wake up. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw his grandfather looking at him furiously. Lin Yun also looked at him helplessly. He sighed inwardly and pressed the little person in his arms down, revealing only her pointy little head. Pei Chi-Chi woke up and didn't dare to make a sound when she heard the noise. She felt even more uncomfortable. Old Master Lin wasn't someone who could be easily dismissed. He looked at Tang Yu coldly. You dragged a little nurse to your bed just because you're staying in the hospital? Tang Yu smiled and patted Pei Chi-Chi, indicating for her to lie down. He got up and put on his clothes. He calmly buttoned up his shirt. His elegant demeanor made old Master Lin even angrier. Go to work when you've recovered. You're embarrassing yourself here. You should sleep in the hospital, old Master Lin said as he looked at the little girl on the bed. He was feeling smug. Wasn't that lass usually fierce with him? No matter how thick-skinned she was, once she was on his grandson's bed, no matter how fierce she was, she wouldn't be able to be fierce anymore. Looking at old Master Lin's flushed face, Tang Yu thought, last night, he said that Chi-Chi was like a child, but old Master Lin was more like a child now. He smiled and looked at old Master Lin. He said softly, let's go sit in the small living room outside. I'll get Chi-Chi to wake up. His expression couldn't be more natural. There was a hint of gentleness in it. Old Master Lin touched his nose. This grandson of his was going to be eaten by that girl. He glared at Tang Yu and went out with Lin Yun. As soon as he went out, the nurse from before said sternly, Elder Lin, don't humiliate us nurses in the future. We won't sleep with you. Old Master Lin froze for a moment before chuckling. He knew that his words had been rude. Only then did the nurse give up and go out. Lin Yun helped Grandpa Shen sit down. Only the two of them were left in the living room. Grandpa Shen looked around and said in a low voice, I know I'm making things difficult for you. Look at the situation. Your precious son is disappointing. He probably can't sleep with anyone else other than this girl. He said it casually, but Lin Yun took it to heart. Others might not know about Tang Yu's problem, but as his mother, she knew. Pei Chi-Chi was indeed the only woman Tang Yu could touch now. In case, seeing that her expression was strange, Grandpa Xing didn't say much and just waited. After a while, he roared into the room, are you putting on or taking off your clothes, Tang Yu? His words were crude. There was no helping it. Grandpa Xing had been out when he was young, and he had never changed his temper. With this roar, the two little ones came out in a short while. Pei Chi-Chi was naturally uncomfortable. Fortunately, Tang Yu held her in his arms and said a few words casually. Then, the matter was over. They didn't talk about marriage. It seemed too deliberate, and it wasn't the right time or place. Grandpa Xing didn't say much. He just looked at Tang Yu meaningfully. Didn't you take the jade pendant from me last time? Your grandmother left a lot of things for you. She said that it would be for your wife in the future. I don't think it'll take up space with me. You can take it with you tomorrow, so I won't have to worry. Chapter 491. Tang Yu smiled. Okay. I'll bring Chi-Chi with me. Old Master Lin glanced at Pei Chi-Chi and snorted. I've been talking until my mouth is dry. Don't you have any water to drink? Pei Chi-Chi obediently went to pour tea. Naturally, she wouldn't just pour one cup. She poured Lin Yun's tea as well. Old Master Lin took it and wasn't in a hurry to drink it. He tilted his head to look at his daughter's reaction. Also, that girl, Pei Chi-Chi, looked so nervous that she was about to cry. Looking left and right, it wasn't Tang Yu's wishful thinking. This girl still cared about their Tang Yu a lot. Old Master Lin's heart felt comfortable. He raised his head and drank the tea. Lin Yun looked at Pei Chi-Chi's lowered little face. That little face was somewhat similar to Zhao Ku when she was young. The only difference was that Zhao Ku at that time was flamboyant, while the Pei Chi-Chi in front of her had a hint of forbearance in her perseverance. Lin Yun looked at them for a long time. She couldn't figure out how a man like Pei Mingyi could have a daughter with such a temperament. One had to know that Pei Chi-Chi didn't go easy on Zhao Ku. This was also one of the reasons why Lin Yun had objected before. She always felt that a little girl was too ruthless. She preferred simpler girls. But now, this little girl was holding a cup of tea and looking at her nervously, yearning for her approval. Lin Yun's heart was filled with an indescribable feeling. All these years of unwillingness, all these years of loneliness, all these years of hatred, at this moment, all disappeared from this little face. She thought that these past things didn't matter after all. After all, Tang Yu's happiness was more important. She also believed that if Tang Yu could do it, he would rather break up with Pei Chi than hurt her. But Tang Yu couldn't do it. And she could only accept. Perhaps for a few years she wouldn't be able to see Pei Chi as comfortable as she was in the past. But Lin Yun thought, perhaps one day, they would have a child. The little angel sent by God would slowly make her forget everything in the past. Finally, Lin Yun took the cup from Pei Chi-Chi's hand. Although it was just a small sip, the meaning behind it was indescribable. Pei Chi-Chi's eyes were watery, but she didn't lose her composure. She pursed her lips and stood beside Tang Yu like a little wife. Grandpa Sheng and Lin Yun didn't stay for long. After they finished their tea, they said, "If there's nothing serious, go home. Don't take up public resources." Tang Yu smiled faintly and said nothing. The old man looked at Pei Chi maliciously. "Girl, don't forget the contract we made. 10 billion. If he dared to violate it, he would have to pay 10 billion. Pei Xiaoqi was dumbfounded. The old master was pleased with himself. "Humph, fighting with me." In fact, Grandpa Xing knew that this day would come, so he deliberately framed her. Even if he sold Pei Chi, he wouldn't get the 10 billion. In the end, Tang Yu had to pay the bill. Grandpa Xing was quite pleased with himself. It had been a long time since he played such a prank, especially when he saw the girl's dumbfounded expression. When they walked downstairs, Grandpa Lin laughed and looked at Lin Yun. "Actually, that girl is quite cute." However, as a man, he felt that Tang Yu couldn't let go of her mainly because that girl was good-looking. She wasn't just good-looking, but exceptionally good-looking. Grandpa Xing sighed in his heart. It wasn't without reason that Tang Ziyuan was infatuated with Zhao Ku. When she was young, Zhao Ku's beauty was especially flamboyant, and no man could resist it. However, Pei Chi-Chi's beauty was different from Zhao Ku's. It was the kind that was breathtaking and unforgettable after looking at it for a long time. Chapter 492. Since he had reconciled with Pei Chi-Chi, there was no need for Tang Yu to stay in the hospital anymore. Besides, the hospital was not as convenient as home. Thinking about how the nurse could come in at any time and lock the door just to kiss her, that didn't feel good. That afternoon, Tang Yu was discharged from the hospital. Without alerting anyone, he asked the driver to pick him up. After one night, he didn't know whether it was because he had recovered well or because Pei Chi was by his side, but the bruises on his back had faded a lot. The black limousine drove all the way to the Rose Garden. The driver, Uncle Zhao, wanted to help Tang Yu up, but Tang Yu waved his hand lightly. "I'm fine. Go and rest first." Old Zhao then left. As soon as he left, Tang Yu looked at Pei Chi. "Why aren't you helping me? Uncle Zhao wanted to help you just now, but you didn't want to." She talked back to him, but still came over to help him. Tang Yu gave half of his weight to her. He still needed to rest for 2 days when he walked upstairs. He didn't need to stay in bed, but he couldn't stand for long, and he couldn't do strenuous exercise. "Director," he said it. Tang Yu sat on the sofa and frowned. Pei Chi immediately rolled up his sweater carefully and checked the injury on his back. "Does it hurt a lot?" She touched it gently with her little hand. Tang Yu grunted. "Help me apply some medicine." With that, he lay down. Pei Chi half knelt beside him and lifted up his sweater. She picked up some green cream with her fingertips and carefully applied it on his back. She was very careful not to hurt him. "It's done." She helped him put down his sweater and said in a small voice. But he had already grabbed her little arm and pulled hard. Pei Chi had already fallen on the soft sofa. Then, she was pressed under his body. Her dark hair was scattered and messy, as if she was struggling hopelessly. Tang Yu looked at her beautiful face and felt an indescribable softness in his heart. Him and her, deciding to be together, had gone through a lot of struggle. Chi-Chi, have you really thought it through? His voice was warm as he lowered his head. His hot, thin lips pressed against her little mouth, lightly touching it. She wanted to see him tease her like this. Her rosy little mouth opened slightly and carried a trace of a pleading expression as she looked at him with a pitiable expression. Chi-Chi, do you want me to kiss you? He lowered his head and whispered into her ear. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lips. No. He chuckled and tried to get up, but she quickly wrapped her arms around his neck. Her soft arms rubbed against his neck, and his heart softened as well. Tang Yu lowered his head and the tip of his nose touched hers. His voice was extremely hoarse. Do you want to kiss me? Her eyes were closed and her expression was fragile. She looked like she would let him do whatever he wanted. Tang Yu looked at her. His blood was boiling, but he still held it in and deliberately teased her. Chi-Chi, you can do it yourself. As he said that, he suddenly got up and sat on the sofa. He looked elegant and serious. But that kind of feeling of abstinence was even more enticing to her. Pei Chi-Chi lay there for a while, biting her little finger. Should she eat him or not? Although it was a little embarrassing, she still couldn't help but climb into his arms in the end. Chapter 493. Tang Yu waited patiently. After a long while, she moved to the side of his lips and gently bit his lips. He looked at her without batting an eyelid. She took another small bite and looked at him pitifully. This pitiful little thing. Finally, he let out a low laugh, held her body, lifted her up high, and lowered his head to kiss her little mouth. Perhaps she had waited for too long. She was especially active and gentle, her little hands hugging his neck. She was fragrant and soft, especially obedient. Tang Yu let go of her mouth with difficulty. His breathing was erratic and he stared at her with a passionate gaze. Pei Chi-Chi, do you still want it? Her little hands quietly went under his sweater and her little face was buried in his arms. She said in a muffled voice, Tang Yu, you jerk. He laughed in a low voice, his big palms caressing her and his lips bit her little ear. Chi-Chi, huh? She was indignant and let out a shrill scream. In the end, she blushed and slowly sat in his arms. Her little face was burning hot. It was so comfortable to hug each other like that. At this moment, it was as if they had returned to the best of times in the past. It was as if they had never experienced that pain and hurt. It was as if she had just walked into his suite, he was drunk and she was drugged, she leaned into his arms and kissed him, just like that, they were entangled for the rest of their lives. When it was over, Pei Chi-Chi was covered in a thin layer of sweat. She leaned into his arms and panted like a little animal. She had never been so tired before. All along, Tang Yu had been the one to serve her, including when they first started dating. He did not like women to take the initiative. He liked to explore her body slowly. Pei Chi-Chi panted and her little hand slowly scratched his back. Tang Yu, does it hurt? His fingers touched her too. Chi-Chi, how about you? She bit her lip. He was shameless. She leaned on his shoulder and gave him a small bite. It was a little painful, but it was indeed sweet. He turned her little face and kissed her little mouth. As if kissing was not enough, he kissed her the whole night. Fortunately, he had an injury on his back and could not indulge himself too much. Hence, he did not act too rashly after that. After taking a bath and having an afternoon nap, Pei Chi-Chi woke up on the luxurious big bed, her fair and fragrant arms stretched out from under the blanket, wanting to hug Tang Yu. She did not manage to hug him and instead stuffed a pillow in her arms. Her long eyelashes trembled and she opened her eyes. He was not in the bedroom. She was only wearing a bathrobe and she was nodding. The door to the study was open. Pei Chi opened the door and saw Tang Yu sitting behind the wooden desk. He was wearing a white shirt and black trousers, holding a document in his hand. Of the study, Xiao Ran was still standing there. Pei Chi did not expect Xiao Ran to come over at this time. She gasped and was stunned. Tang Yu looked up and saw Pei Chi. From her bathrobe to her bare feet, his face darkened. Go to the bedroom and change. Although Xiao Ran was a woman, Tang Yu was a man who paid special attention to privacy. He was fierce. Pei Chi quickly glared at him, then nodded to Xiao Ran and flew out. Xiao Ran was also a little dumbfounded. Just like that, they slept together again. The boss's emotional world was so mysterious. It was not something that ordinary people like them could understand. Chapter 494. Just as Xiao Ran was about to leave, Tang Yu stopped her. President, do you have any other orders? Xiao Ran asked in a serious tone. Tang Yu looked at her seriously. Xiao Ran, help me empty the GM hotel and renovate it in half a year. Renovate it in half a year. Xiao Ran raised an eyebrow. He had an answer in his heart. This time, even the engagement ceremony was skipped. The CEO was probably traumatized by the engagement and wanted to get married directly. Of course, the bride would only be Pei Chi. Xiao Ran nodded. Okay. Do you have anything in mind, CEO? Tang Yu thought for a moment and smiled. I'll make other arrangements. Empty the hotel first. Xiao Ran left. Tang Yu walked back to his bedroom. There was no one there. He thought for a moment and went to the changing room. When he went there, he was stunned even though he had made love with Pei Chi countless times. Under the warm light, the bathrobe was piled at her feet. Pei Chi bent down and looked for clothes in the wardrobe. Small shoulders, beautiful lines on her back, and she was covering herself with one hand. Just looking at her like this, Tang Yu couldn't help himself. He walked over slowly and hugged her from behind. His voice was a little hoarse. Looking for clothes. Only then did he remember that there weren't any clothes for her to change into. Her clothes were all in Xia City. Pei Chi was shocked. She was a little shy to be hugged like this. She bit her lip and said in a small voice, Tang Yu. She held his hand with her little hand, trying to make him let go. Not only did he not let go, but he hugged her even tighter. His hot breath blew beside her ear, making her eyes move. Tang Yu's fingers held her hand and his face was very close to her face. It was the same with his body. Baby, we're mine, okay? He hugged her. She was so petite, as if he was hugging a little doll. However, the more taboo a man was, the more excited he was. Especially since they had been apart for so long. Although they did have sex occasionally, it was always sneaky or he forced himself on her. Naturally, it was not as pleasant as when they were in love. He reached into the closet, picked out a loose sweater, and put it on her. The white sweater on her small body could almost be used as a skirt. Very big, somewhat cute, his fingers threaded behind and smoothed her long hair out of her sweater. Her trembling little body had been at his mercy. She was carried to the full-length mirror. Facing the mirror, Tang Yu hugged her from behind. His gaze was filled with admiration as he looked at her fair and straight calves. As a man, his mind was already filled with countless fantasies. His large palm landed on her waist and his voice was warm. Pei Chi, this is my shirt, she let out a soft hum. He kissed her little neck and chuckled in a low voice, his large palm lingering on her beautiful little waist. Now, I want to take back my shirt. He pressed his lips against her little neck and kissed her. Pei Chi punched him angrily. Tang Yu laughed again. You want to wear clothes. Only later did Pei Chi know what wearing clothes meant. After a long time, she fell asleep. By then, the sky was already dark. Tang Yu lay on his side, stroking her smooth little shoulder from time to time. His gaze was a little deep. The reason why he had decided to get married so soon was because he had already intentionally impregnated her. A child must have a legal identity. Chapter 495. When Pei Chi woke up again, Tang Axian was sitting at the head of the bed. The little baldy had grown into a buzz cut and was as cute as a little hedgehog. Seeing that Pei Chi had woken up, Tang Axian was very excited. She pulled Pei Chi's hand and said, Chi, Big Bro has sent a lot of clothes. However, there was one thing that Tang Axian did not understand. Did Chi like wearing sweaters? Also, the sweaters were quite big and did not fit her well. It's so easy to take off. Pei Chi was still in a daze, so our little hedgehog dragged her off the bed to look at the new clothes. They were all top brands, but there were different styles. Some were suitable for Chi-Chi's work, and some were for young girls. Tang Axian was a little confused about the last wardrobe. The sweaters were very big and were obviously not Chi-Chi's size. Also, they looked like men's clothing. Why did they have to put them in Chi-Chi's wardrobe? Tang Yu coughed softly at the door. These sweaters are mine. Tang Axian let out a yelp and ran over to hug his arm. She asked pitifully, they don't fit Chi-Chi. You can wear it at home. Chi-Chi feels that it's especially convenient and comfortable to wear at home. He looked up at Pei Chi. Isn't that right, Chi? Pei Chi's face blushed. She thought about how he pressed her against the mirror and did all kinds of shameless things in the changing room. Tang Axian looked at her as if she had discovered a new continent. Chi, why is your face red? Pei Chi reached out to touch her face. I don't have it. Where? You're just blushing. Tang Axian looked up at her brother. Oh. Tang Yu smiled and pinched Chi-Chi's cheeks. Don't bully Chi. Tang Axian looked at him as if he was a monster. Brother, why do I feel like you're treating Chi as your daughter? Nonsense. Although he was scolding her, his voice was gentle. He rubbed Tang Axian's head and looked at Pei Chi. Get changed, we'll come downstairs for dinner. Since Tang Axian was there, he couldn't stay and help her change. He signaled Pei Chi with his eyes and left. Tang Axian wanted to stay and look at Chi-Chi's perfect body, but Tang Yu dragged her downstairs. After they left, Pei Chi picked a white Chanel wool dress and changed into it. She walked downstairs. Tang Yu was sitting on the sofa reading a magazine while Tang Axian was kneeling beside him, trying to please him. Pei Chi walked closer and heard Tang Axian begging Tang Yu. Brother, let me sleep with Chi tonight. Tang Yu glanced at her, then looked up at Pei Chi. You're already a big girl. You don't need anyone to coax you to sleep, do you? Tang Axian blinked. I can protect Chi. Who needs you to protect her? This sister of his was incredible. Tang Yu put down the magazine in his hand and put on an authoritative look. Tang Axian whimpered. Her brother was a big pervert, and Chi wanted to protect him. However, Tang Axian didn't dare to make another sound. She looked at Pei Chi with pitiful eyes and said in a meek voice, Chi. Her voice was dragged out. Actually, Pei Chi was grateful to Tang Yu. He took Tang Axian without her asking. Chapter 496. However, Pei Chi did not expect Tang Yu to agree. He rubbed Tang Yu's hair, stood up and smiled. Okay. Tang Axian clasped her palms together happily. When Tang Yu walked past Pei Chi, he threw her a look. She understood what he meant. She had to report to his bedroom before going to bed. Otherwise, she would be in deep trouble. She grabbed his hand and shook it coquettishly. Tang Yu turned his head and looked at her. He squeezed her little hand for a moment before letting her go. Tang Xian stared at him without blinking. It was amazing, did her brother and Chi really reconcile? Therefore, during dinner, she kept looking at one of them and then the other. Her gaze was strange. Pei Chi pretended not to see it. After dinner, Tang Xian pestered Pei Chi to read comics on the sofa. Tang Xian giggled and did not look sick at all. She seemed to have forgotten about Zhao Ku. However, Pei Chi was the one who was related to her by blood. How could she not see that Tang Xian's heart was fragile? She thought of her mother. She was like a weak animal. Although she seemed to be doted on, she felt uneasy and did not want everyone to know about it. Pei Chi couldn't say anything, and she couldn't let Tang Xian know too much. She reached out to touch Tang Xian. The only thing she could do was to make her happy. Tang Yu was sitting on another sofa. He was flipping through a magazine and glancing at Tang Xian from time to time. He did not want Tang Xian to come over today. He and Chi had just reconciled. Naturally, it would not be too much for them to be together. However, Chi wanted to see Tang Xian. Mr. Tang put down the magazine sadly. He walked to the French window and opened the cover of the piano. His slender fingers tapped on it, a string of musical notes flowed out from his fingers. It was beautiful and moving. Pei Chi was a little dazed as her gaze drifted over. Tang Yu just sat there casually. His simple attire was very tasteful. His entire body exuded a noble aura that no one could compare to. The music under her fingers was light and sometimes lingering. Tang Xian looked at him eagerly, her face full of admiration. "Brother, you play so well." Pei Chi was also lying there. The two little ones were looking at Tang Yu. They were indescribably cute. Tang Yu occasionally raised his eyes, his gaze sweeping past Tang Xian and landing on Pei Chi's face. He smiled. There was warmth in his eyes. When Pei Chi saw this, she felt like crying. Because she understood that, just like her, it would be very difficult for Tang Yu to overcome his own difficulties. But after such a storm, he was so calm. He had always been stronger than her. Pei Chi looked at him. She pursed her lips. Her heart was a little agitated. Tang Yu smiled faintly. His slender fingers slid across the black and white keyboard. He was especially engrossed in the music. After the song, he sat there and turned his head to look at Pei Chi. She was lying on his sofa softly. It was as if she had blended in with her surroundings. He smiled. Actually, what did it matter if she was Zhao Ku's daughter or not? She was Pei Chi. That was the little one he loved the most. The night was dark. His emotions were hard to calm down. His dark eyes were locked on her. Pei Chi actually felt that she had forgotten to breathe, late at night. Chapter 497. The door opened and the light inside was dim. Tang Yu was leaning against the headboard in his bathrobe, holding a cigarette. When he saw Pei Chi come in, he put out the cigarette. Pei Chi went over, knelt in front of him and took the cigarette away. "You're injured, why are you still smoking?" Her tone was natural and a little fierce. Tang Yu looked at her, his voice a little hoarse. "Why are you here? Is Tang Xian asleep?" Pei Chi nodded. "I'll help you apply the medicine." Tang Yu looked at her deeply. "Are you sure you don't have any other thoughts?" "What other thoughts could I have?" When he lay down, she carefully applied the medicine for him. When she closed his bathrobe, her face was a little red. She couldn't help but have some thoughts in her heart. Tang Yu smiled and sat up. He reached out his arm and took something from the bedside table. Pei Chi looked at it and felt a little jealous. Because it was that piece of jade. He put it on her and then took it off with his own hands. Tang Yu. Her voice was like a kitten, looking at him eagerly. Tang Yu smiled. Chi, do you want to put it on? She didn't say anything, her eyes were a little misty. Tang Yu sighed softly, smiled and pinched her little face. Chi. Tang Yu, I'm scared. She reached out and hugged him, burying her little face in his arms. Tang Yu reached out and touched her little head. His voice was a little hoarse. Chi, nothing in this world is perfect. For you, you gave up Jinrong because of me. For me, there are some things that I need to let go of. So, silly, no one owes anyone anything. You have never let anyone down. He looked at her tenderly, his voice especially alluring in the middle of the night. On the contrary, our Chi is very brave. She was stunned. Staying in his arms, she was really small like a little baby. She just stared at him blankly, pursing her lips as if she didn't know what to do. Tang Yu sighed and his voice was even more gentle. Chi, I'm here for you in the future. She finally spoke. She pouted and said angrily, you only know how to buy my company. Lowering her little face, she crouched on his chest, searched for that spot, and bit him fiercely. Tang Yu let out a muffled groan and his body stiffened. Then, he lowered his head, grabbed her little head, and kissed her little mouth passionately. Pei Chi grabbed his bathrobe tightly and slowly wrapped it around his neck. She raised her face and obediently let him kiss her. After a long time, he let go of her little mouth. It was bright red and especially alluring. Tang Yu hugged her with one hand and put the jade on her little neck with the other. He admired it silently for a while before saying in a low voice, Chi, don't take it off again. She looked down and touched it with her fingers. It was warm and moist, and there was still Tang Yu's warmth. You were the one who took it off last time, she said with her head lowered and a little mischievously. Her delicate look made people love and hate her at the same time. Tang Yu's face was stern. You were the one who purposely made me angry. With that said, he hugged her warmly and pressed his face against hers. He sighed. Pei Chi, I've aged a lot when I'm with you. She hugged his waist like a little lamb. You're not old. Through the thin bathrobe, her face felt his overly hot temperature, and her little face quietly blushed. He patted her little head. Pei Chi, what nonsense are you thinking about? Chapter 499. Tang Yu took the bottle and looked at it. Aren't these vitamins? Pei Chi was furious. Glaring at him, she poked his chest with her little hand. You said it was to avoid pregnancy pills. Tang Yu frowned. Did I? He added, I don't remember such a thing. Pei Chi was stunned. She had never thought that Tang Yu would be so shameless. But you were the one who gave it to me and said that I can't have children. She looked at him with beads of sweat on her nose, not knowing what to do. Because, someone like Tang Yu would never go back on his word. However, the person in front of her was acting shamelessly with a straight face. Tang Yu smiled and was about to say something when he saw Tang Xian poking her head out of the door. His expression froze and he scolded, Tang Xian, get out and close the door. The little hedgehog at the door howled and closed the door. She wanted to eavesdrop but didn't dare to. It seemed like something terrible had happened just now. When the door to the changing room was closed, Tang Yu carried Pei Chi and put her on the white vanity. His arms were strong and it was effortless for him to carry her. Pei Chi tugged at his sweater. Tang Yu. The vanity was a little cold and he was too hot. Her slender body felt like it was going to melt under his grip. Pei Chi's voice trembled. Let go of me. The thought of Tang Xian still being outside made Pei Chi feel a little traumatized. The memory of Tang Xian lifting the blanket was still fresh in her mind. At this moment, she was afraid that Tang Yu would. Tang Xian would run and again. She sat there helplessly and weakly with Tang Yu in the middle. He reached out and held her waist, his eyes gentle. He lowered his head and said in a seductive voice, Chi, let's have a child. Give birth. Pei Chi's eyes were wide open. That delicate little face of hers was slightly tilted upwards, and her eyes were filled with tenderness. She stared at him. Tang Yu let out a low sigh and covered those overly beautiful eyes with his hands. Chi, would you be angry if I told you that I've been trying to get you pregnant on purpose? Yes. She stammered, as he covered her eyes. Her small hand grasped his hand and looked at him with a serious expression. Is it because you don't want the old master to object, that's why you want to have a child? No. He denied it, but he didn't let go of her hand. Instead, he held it in his hand and said slowly, it's because of Tang Xian. Tang Xian. Pei Chi was stunned. Tang Yu looked at her and said seriously, Chi, you're related to her by blood. So, if we give birth to a child, it's possible that Tang Xian will be compatible. Pei Chi was in a daze. She didn't notice that he said that she was related to Tang Xian by blood, not him. No matter how much she thought about it, she would never have thought of this. Tang Yu looked at her absent-minded expression. He bent down and whispered to her lips, Chi, what are you thinking about? She looked up and looked at him. Her voice was uncertain and weak, but there was a hint of ecstasy in it. Is there really hope? He reached out to touch her little mouth and said in a low voice, Tang Xian calls you sister and calls me brother. In other words, I'm also your brother. Chapter 500. Pei Chi glared at him. Tang Yu smiled again and pressed his lips against her ear. Be good and call me Big Brother. I'm begging Big Brother to dote on you. This pervert. Pei Chi never knew that he was such a pervert. But staring at him like that didn't hurt him at all. Fortunately, he let her go after teasing her for a while. He only kissed her lightly for a while before saying in a hoarse voice, let's go downstairs for breakfast. Otherwise, Tang Xian will come in again. She looked up and there were tears in her eyes. Tang Yu looked at her and said thoughtfully, don't sleep with Tang Xian tonight. He had to hurry up to make a baby. Tang Yu's gaze was deep and he smiled. Chi, if I had a choice, I wouldn't want you to get pregnant so soon. She was still too young. He couldn't bear to let her be a little mother so soon. Moreover, he didn't want a weak little thing to be stuck in between them. He wanted to be alone with Chi, but he had no choice but to get pregnant. It's all right. She bit her lip, her face a little red as she looked up at him. Then tonight, her voice was as soft as a mosquito. I'll come over to see you tonight. Tang Yu smiled and pinched her cheek. He walked out first. Pick your clothes and change. She replied with an oh and felt that her face was burning. Downstairs, Tang Xian ate her toast while looking at Tang Yu and Pei Chi. Chi, why is your face so red? Tang Xian asked anxiously. Did Big Brother bully you? Pei Chi took a piece of ham and stuffed it into her mouth. No. Eat. Tang Xian's mouth was full. She tried her best to swallow and pouted. Chi, don't you realize that you can be so rude when you're angry? Really? Pei Chi glared at her. Tang Xian stuck out her tongue. It's true. If you don't believe me, you can ask Big Brother. Pei Chi then looked at Tang Yu. Mr. Tang was reading the newspaper in his hand. He was dressed like a family man. He smiled faintly. Tang Axian does have a point. He put down the newspaper and looked at Pei Chi. Pei Chi, haven't you noticed? Not at all. She angrily stuffed food into her mouth. She looked no more mature than Tang Axian. Chi, why don't you stuff food into your brother's mouth instead of bullying me? Tang Axian was a little displeased. This was incredible. Pei Chi glared at Tang Axian. Mr. Tang smiled faintly. When there's no one around, Chi is also rude to me. Tang Axian looked at him eagerly. So, he knows how to stuff things. In Tang Yu's eyes, there was a tacit agreement. Pei Chi covered her face, feeling that she was too ashamed to face anyone. Tang Axian, you little bastard. But she didn't know that her current appearance was not much different from Tang Axian's. She was also a young girl, a girl who needed love. She wasn't someone who wanted to be a mother. When Tang Yu thought about the process of making her pregnant, the newspaper in his hand became dull. He looked meaningfully at the mother of his future child and thought to himself silently, actually, he hoped that she would be rude to him, just like how she treated Tang Axian. Otherwise, it would be better if he was rude to her. Just like how she treated Tang Axian just now. Chapter 501. Night fell. Pei Chi waited for Tang Axian to fall asleep before coming over. Closing the door, she saw that Tang Yu was still awake. He was reading a magazine on the sofa. He had just showered and there were still water droplets on his hair. Pei Chi was wearing a bathrobe that was his size. She tugged at it uncomfortably and walked towards him. Kneeling beside him, she picked up a towel to wipe the water droplets off his hair. Why aren't you drying your hair? Tang Yu flipped through the magazine and said calmly, aren't you coming over? Pei Chi pursed her lips and pinched him secretly. He didn't mind and let her be naughty. In the end, Pei Chi still managed to tidy up his hair. He had always been noble. Even if he was only wearing a white bathrobe, it was still very pleasing to the eyes, especially his slender legs, which were straight and seductive. She put down the towel in her hand. Seeing that he had no intention of sleeping, she buried her face in his arms and said in a muffled voice, "It's 11 o'clock." Tang Yu grunted softly and didn't say anything. Pei Chi bit her lip and called out again, "Tang Yu, aren't you going to sleep?" He finally put down the magazine in his hand and carried her over to sit comfortably in his arms. Her long black hair was spread over her shoulders and her eyes were full of affection. In the middle of the night, she was indescribably seductive. He wasn't a blockhead. How could he not know what she was thinking? She came over to have a child with him. Tang Yu grunted lightly and carried her to the luxurious bed. She was carefully placed on the huge bed. Her body was as small as a baby. The light was dim and the curtains were lowered. He was standing in front of the bed. Pei Chi would be lying if she said she wasn't nervous. She pursed her lips and looked at him. She was nervous like a woman in the ancient times. Finally, he slowly laid down beside her, the soft bed slightly sinking. Then, she was swept into a warm embrace. Her slightly cold nose touched his warm neck. She felt a little hot and didn't know what to do. In the past, they did it because they wanted to do it. This time, it was to give birth to a child. Pei Chi didn't know what to do. Her warm lips were pressed against his neck, and her voice was trembling. "Tang Yu, are you asleep?" His answer was yes. Pei Chi was not an idiot. He was clearly not asleep, but he was pretending to be asleep. He was clearly teasing her. He clearly knew that she wanted to have a child with him, but he was not in a hurry. She bit him angrily. Jerk. Tang Yu let out a low and deep laugh. He held onto her little body and pinned her down in an instant. Her black hair hung low and scattered on the side of her pure white pillow. Her delicate face was dyed scarlet. Pei Chi bit her lip and looked at him pitifully. Tang Yu. Call me brother. He reached out and stroked her delicate face. Call me brother. Say. I want you. He said it in her ear, laughing delightedly at her. Pei Chi's face turned even redder. She glared at him. Tang Yu, you're shameless. Then, forget it. He let go of her generously, looking as if he had lost interest. Then, he flipped to the side and lay flat. Pei Chi was left lying there. Her bathrobe was in a mess, and her face was red. That was it. He didn't want it. Pei Chi nibbled on her little finger and turned to look at him. Tang Yu reached out and pulled her into his arms. His voice was a little hoarse. Let's sleep. But she wanted to have a child with him. Hence, she wriggled in his arms and refused to sleep. Tang Yu pushed her head away. Pei Chi. Chapter 502. Pei Chi felt wronged. They had agreed to have a baby. Moreover, he was Tang Xian's brother. He should do something about it. However, he didn't seem to be in a hurry. He wasn't in a hurry, but Pei Chi was. She kissed his thin lips without a care in the world. She was fragrant and soft. Her little hands hooked around his neck and her body was pressed against him. He couldn't resist the temptation. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her passionately for a long time. Then, there was no then. Pei Chi looked at Tang Yu lying flat again and wanted to cry. She bit her lips and hesitated for a long time. Finally, she leaned into his arms and pressed her lips against his ear. Her voice was as soft as a kitten's. Brother, I beg you. Tang Yu's body instantly tensed up. He opened his eyes and turned his head to look at the little face that was as fresh as a painting. His Adam's apple rolled uncontrollably, and his voice was so hoarse that it sounded like he was scraping sand. Say it again. She had probably said it once before. She wasn't that shy anymore. She called her brother softer and more passionately, begging him to love her. In the end, her hot-blooded brother turned into a wolf. In the end, Pei Chi was in a lot of pain. He didn't let her off even after calling her brother for the whole night. Finally, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, he felt that it was enough. He flipped her flat and pulled her into his arms. His big palm touched the indescribable part with a touch of male satisfaction. Baby, is that enough? Pei Chi couldn't have more. He was a pervert who wanted her to accept all of him. She couldn't have been any more full. She bit her little mouth and then his neck, sobbing softly. He was so bad. Tang Yu's heart was indescribably full. Tonight, she called him brother again and again and begged him again and again. Others wouldn't understand this kind of bad taste. At this moment, she was really frightened by him. No matter what, he had to coax his little baby. Reaching out to pat her, he said in a warm voice, "Be good, I won't come again." She flipped over a little arrogantly and threw herself into his arms. Her voice sounded a little aggrieved. You said it was the last time. Furthermore, he said it was the last time. He said it many times, but it didn't count. Tang Yu chuckled softly. This little fellow was really vengeful. He stopped teasing her, carried her to the shower, and changed the sheets. He rarely did such things, but his little girl was tormented to the point where she was on her last breath. How could he order her around? They lay down together. Pei Chi nestled in his arms and said softly, Tang Yu, do you think I can get pregnant tonight? For a moment, Tang Yu had a feeling that he was a stud horse. However, he did not intend to tell her that these few days, she was, in a safe period. If you can't get pregnant tonight, we'll try again tomorrow night. Mr. Tang was very easy to talk to. Pei Xiaoqi hugged him like he was hugging a piece of driftwood. Tang Yu smiled and hugged her to sleep. For a few days in a row, Tang Yu did not rest. His injury, which should have healed a long time ago, did not. Pei Xiaoqi was also a little dispirited and listless from her lively state. Moreover, what saddened her the most was that she had tried so hard for so long, but she still could not get pregnant, because her period was here again. It was when Tang Yu kissed her. Chapter 503. Pei Qiqi looked at him in disbelief. How could that be? Didn't they try very hard to have sex? They didn't use protection. Why didn't she get pregnant? Pei Qiqi bit her lip and sat up. She looked fragile and adorable. Tang Yu reached out to help her put on the bathrobe, carried her and walked towards the bathroom. Her long hair was wrapped around him and her little hand was hanging around his neck. Tang Yu's voice was a little soft and warm. Are you disappointed? She nodded and buried her face in his shoulder. I'm afraid it's too late. No. Tang Yu patted her. You'll get pregnant soon. He put her on the toilet. Take care of it. Pei Qiqi looked up. His eyes were warm and he reached out to rub her little head. Oh, he said softly and walked out. Pei Qiqi walked out after taking care of it. Tang Yu stood in front of the French window in the bedroom. He had a cigarette in his hand, but he didn't smoke it. Pei Qiqi then realized that he hadn't smoked for a long time and didn't drink much. Obviously, it was to prepare for pregnancy. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind and pressed her face against his back. Tang Yu, even though you're doing this for Tang Xan, do you really have high hopes for this child? He wanted to turn around but she wouldn't let him and hugged him stubbornly. This fool, she was being stubborn again. Tang Yu placed his palm on her little hand and his voice was a little seductive in the middle of the night. Qiqi, I do. Although this child may come a little early, as long as it's your child, I have expectations. He tightened his palm and stood with her in the endless night. Their heartbeats slowly became synchronized. After a while, Pei Qiqi said softly, also, don't kiss me there in the future. It had already been 2 times, and he had kissed her both times. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at her fair hands. Then, he pulled her into his arms from behind and rested his chin on her hair. His voice was especially elegant and seductive in the middle of the night. Don't you like it? Pei Qiqi's hand tightened, but she didn't make a sound. How could I not like it? But she never thought that he would have such a hobby. Didn't he find it dirty? No, it's just too. Her voice was especially soft, I can't stand it. After saying that, she threw herself into his arms coquettishly, as fragile as a small animal. Tang Yu's fingers caressed her silky black hair as he smiled. Does our Qiqi like it? She was a little embarrassed, but Pei Qiqi still growled and found a certain part of him. She took a small bite and said, I like it. Then she said softly, don't you find it dirty? He was such a noble person, but he actually liked this kind of thing. Tang Yu chuckled and hugged her. How can our Qiqi be dirty? Such a beautiful little thing. Beautiful everywhere. She nestled in his arms obediently, and after a while, she popped her head out. Are we going to work harder after that? Actually, he didn't have to work so hard, it was just giving birth, as long as it was enough. But Tang Yu used everything that he hadn't used before. Mr. Tang coughed lightly and looked down at her. The more you put in, the smarter the baby will be. Oh. Pei Chi didn't say anything. Tang Yu smiled again and carried her to sleep. Her little hand grabbed his bathrobe, and her face was buried in his neck. She said warmly, "I'm going back to accompany Tang Xan." Chapter 504. In the middle of the night, Pei Chi was willing to talk to him. Tang Yu leaned against her little body and said in a warm voice, "Chi, let's get married, okay?" They were no longer an ordinary couple now. They were ready to have a child. Tang Yu didn't want to remarry, so he wanted to get married. He didn't want to hug her, but there was still a sense of uncertainty in his heart. He would only be at ease if she was willing to marry him. Sometimes, he found it a little funny that there would be a day when he would become so worried about gains and losses. Originally, he was hugging her from behind. She turned her body and clung to his neck. She looked up at him from his arms and said, "Tang Yu, I signed a contract with Grandpa." Her big eyes blinked, looking very delicate. Tang Yu actually knew in his heart that from the beginning of the Pei Corporation and the Lin Corporation's cooperation, she must have used something in exchange. However, he still asked without batting an eyelid, "What did you sign?" He didn't look that angry. Pei Chi said boldly, "It's the condition of the cooperation with the Lin Corporation. I won't marry you, or I'll have to pay you 10 billion yuan. Tang Yu took a deep breath and then pulled her ear and looked at her. "Pei Chi, you're really capable." She cried out in pain, but she didn't dare to make a sound. Tang Yu was angry and amused at the same time. She could still feel pain. Pei Chi cried out and wanted to stay in his arms, but her little ear was held in his hand, and she looked very embarrassed. He stared at her for a long time before letting go and closing his eyes. "I'll solve this matter." Pei Chi lay on his chest to please him, and her little finger was also drawing circles. "Tang Yu, you really have to pay." When she signed the contract, she didn't want to make up with him. Tang Yu sneered. "Silly. At that time, did you think that you had taken advantage of the old man?" He rapped her little head with his finger. "You've been sold, yet you're still helping the old man count the money." Of course, in the end, he was the spendthrift. Pei Chi pouted. "We don't have to get married. That way, we don't have to compensate you." He was the one who insisted on getting married. It had nothing to do with her. So in the end, Pei Chi shamelessly twisted her little body to sleep with her back facing him. She yawned and said, "Tang Yu, you're the one who caused me to break the contract, so of course you have to take responsibility." He looked at her small shoulders, which were soft and delicate, with a little rascally look. He really didn't know what to do with her, but he liked her very much. In the end, Tang Yu just smiled and didn't say anything. So be it, get married, try to have a child with her. After that, they will live happily together. These days had been really tiring, so Pei Chi fell asleep very quickly. Tang Yu woke up for a long time, probably because he was ecstatic, or maybe because he finally got Chi. He hugged her carefully from behind, his face on the back of her neck. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. This little fool, Pei Chi slept soundly, not knowing that Tang Yu had been watching her for the whole night. The next day, she woke up late. When she opened her eyes, the side of the bed was empty, and Tang Yu was no longer in bed. It was a little noisy downstairs, and Pei Chi listened. It sounded like Tang Yuan's voice. She went to change her clothes and walked downstairs. Chapter 505. Pei Chi stood on the stairs and saw Tang Yuan's angry face. He stood separately from Tang Yu and stared at Tang Yu with burning eyes. "I will never agree to you marrying Pei Chi." Pei Chi stood still. But soon, she saw Tang Xan standing beside her. Her lips moved, and her voice was hoarse. Tang Yu, she didn't want Tang Xian to know about this, but Tang Ziyuan was obviously overwhelmed by anger and couldn't care less. He only knew that Pei Chi was the child of that bitch, Zhao Ku. How could he let Tang Yu marry such a woman? Tang Ziyuan wanted to continue, but Tang Yu stopped him with a gloomy face. Tang Xian, go into the room first. Tang Xian stared at him. She couldn't understand why her father was so agitated. Did her father not like Chi-Chi? Chi-Chi was much cuter and prettier than Sister Shun Lian. Moreover, Chi-Chi could cook. Tang Xian stared blankly, and her face was a little pale. Tang Yu called her, and she slowly raised her eyes. She looked at Pei Chi on the stairs and said softly, Chi. Pei Chi forced a smile at her, trying her best not to make Tang Xian feel uneasy. Tang Yu called the maid and brought Tang Xian to the sunroom. Only the three of them were left at the scene. Tang Ziyuan came to take Tang Xian to the hospital for a checkup. He didn't expect to find out from Tang Xian that Tang Yu and Pei Chi had reconciled. Moreover, Old Master Lin and Lin Yun had tacitly agreed. How could this be? Did no one care that she was the child of that bitch, Zhao Ku? Did no one care about his feelings? Tang Ziyuan looked at Pei Chi with contempt. Miss Pei, I think I've made it very clear. You are not welcome here. Pei Chi lowered her eyebrows and smiled. I know. There was some impatience in Tang Ziyuan's eyes. Then leave Tang Yu. It's not up to you to decide whether to leave or not. Tang Yu walked to the bottom of the stairs and gestured for Pei Chi to come down. She slowly walked down without any hesitation until she reached his side and stood shoulder to shoulder with him. Even Tang Ziyuan felt that they were a good match in terms of appearance. Temperament as well. But so what? After all, Pei Chi was Zhao Ku's daughter. He snapped, Tang Yu, don't you care about your mother's feelings? Your mother hated Zhao Ku for so many years. But you're the one who married Zhao Ku, became her husband, and gave birth to Tang Xian. Tang Yu sneered. Dad, don't you think you're in the least position to oppose me and Chi being together? Tang Yu's words were already very polite to Tang Ziyuan. But Tang Ziyuan was angry. On one hand, there was the matter of Pei Chi and Tang Yu, and on the other hand, there was the matter of Zhao Yi. Pei Chi and Tang Yu being together was like a thorn in Lin Yun's heart. How could Lin Yun reconcile with him? Tang Ziyuan looked at Tang Yu and pursed his thin lips. His voice was a little hoarse. Tang Yu, no matter what, I oppose it. Then continue to oppose it. When Pei Chi found Tang Xian upstairs, she was curled up on the sofa in the bedroom, biting her fingers. Seeing Pei Chi come in, she called out happily, Chi. There was a bright smile on her little face. Chi, has Dad left? Chapter 507. Before Tang Ziyuan left, Tang Yu said that he would send Tang Xian back in the afternoon. Tang Xian looked at her pitifully. Chi, can you bear for me to leave this place? That look melted Pei Chi's heart. After a long time, she said softly, I'm going back to my own place tomorrow. Tang Xian looked at her for a long time before letting out a cry. Then, she lay on her stomach and did not make a sound. Her eyes were so pitiful. For a moment, Pei Chi could not bear to see her like that. She hugged her and did not say anything. Instead, she gently stroked her short hair. When Tang Yu sent Tang Xian off, Tang Xian had already gotten into the car. However, she ran out of the car and ran into Pei Chi's arms like a little train. Chi. Tang Xian's voice was especially clingy. She sounded like she was about to cry. Will you leave me one day, just like Mom? Pei Chi was hugged tightly by such a little person. She could barely breathe. Her heart was a little wet. She looked down at Tang Xian. How could that be? She sounded like she was choking. From now on, we'll live together. Tang Xian's body trembled. She looked up with tears in her eyes. Will Dad agree? Pei Chi's eyes were full of warmth. Your brother is here. Tang Yu had also gotten out of the car. When he heard Pei Chi's words, he thought about how she did not say a word when Tang Ziyuan made things difficult for her today. She left everything to him. There was an indescribable softness in his heart. He only felt that she really trusted him. He reached out and pinched her little face. His words were directed at Tang Xian. Chi is right. His eyes met with Pei Chi's. In their eyes, there was a deep love that only they understood. It was pure love that had settled after experiencing everything. After looking at each other for a while, Tang Yu grabbed Tang Xian's little arm and pulled her away. He turned to look at Pei Chi. Stay here. I'll send you to work tomorrow. Maybe. I'll come back later. Previously, they had already agreed that she would be going back to stay. However, he didn't have to go to work until tomorrow. He didn't want her to leave tonight. Pei Chi nodded and watched them get in the car. Tang Xian sat down and watched as Tang Yu drove. After a while, she whispered, Big brother, where are you going later? Tang Yu started the car and smiled. It's about the company. Tang Xian stopped asking. The car arrived at Swallow Road, but Tang Yu didn't go in. He only watched as Tang Xian walked in dejectedly. He held on to the car door and let out a low sigh. Tang Xian was Chi-Chi's younger sister, just like Pei Mingyi. She was very important to Pei Chi. He always did his best to help Chi-Chi's important people and things. Right now, as long as there was a sliver of hope, he would not give up on saving Tang Xian. He didn't want to see Chi sad or disappointed. Only when Tang Xian was out of sight did he get into the car. The car drove straight to the outer city. In the evening, Tang Yu's car stopped in front of a labor camp in the suburbs of Sea City. As soon as he got out of the car, someone immediately greeted him and respectfully welcomed him in. 10 minutes later, Tang Yu saw Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku was wearing a grayish-blue labor camp uniform. Her once beautiful long hair had been cut, reaching her ears. You gave birth to Tang Xian. Are you going to watch her die? She gave birth to a child. Zhao Ku laughed so hard that her tears almost flowed out. She tilted her head and looked at Tang Yu. Yes, I gave birth to her. Chapter 509. Even if she had to spend the rest of her life in prison, she would never see that person again. She couldn't say it out loud. She couldn't say that the man was Tang Xian's father, or it would affect his reputation. The man that she, Zhao Ku, had loved was perfect. There couldn't be any scandals. She loved that man with all her heart and soul, and she thought of him in every way. She did not make a fuss. After all these years, did he ever feel touched? Did he ever think of the time when they were young? He must. He must. Zhao Ku's tears stopped. She looked at Tang Yu. Do you know? Every time I see you, I feel like I'm 20 years younger. You're so much better than Tang Ziyuan. You're so close to me. Tang Yu's shadow overlapped with that man. She could not help but reach out to touch his face. Her fingers did not touch him. Tang Yu dodged. You're crazy. Tang Yu stood up. He knew Zhao Ku would not say anything. Zhao Ku was still sitting in the same place. She was laughing and crying, my life is over," she murmured. A girlish smile appeared on her face. But as she loved, but as she could not get it. When Tang Yu walked to the door, he suddenly stopped. He turned around and looked at Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku's face was full of tears. She looked into Tang Yu's eyes. At that moment, it was as if she had returned to the past. It was as if she had returned to the year when she was pregnant with Pei Chi-Chi. She cried and told him that she was pregnant. She was at a loss. After being with that man, she did not have any other man. She focused on serving him alone. Even though he did not keep her. He only traded with her. At that time, her price was 100,000 yuan. Sometimes, that man only came to see her once a month. At the most, he came once every 2 weeks. She was already a red card. She stubbornly held on to this belief. She thought that if she stopped serving other men, he would look at her and be touched. However, his expression was very calm. It was even a little indifferent. He pushed her soft body away. He told her gently that he had never asked her to do that. She could go and entertain other customers. He didn't want to stand in her way. As for the child, he offered her $5 million to abort the child. He said that he had a family, and even if he didn't, it was impossible to have a result with her, a pleasure girl. That night, for the first time ever, he coaxed her. He told her to be obedient, called her baby, and told her to abort the child. That night, she cried in his arms. She said that she would abort the child. She asked him, abort the child, will he still look for her? He said, yes. As long as she behaved, he would. In the end, she couldn't bear to abort it. She slept with Pei Mingyi for one night. A month later, she told Pei Mingyi that she was pregnant. Pei Mingyi acknowledged the child and served her well until she gave birth. She left the day after she gave birth to Pei Chi-Chi. From then on, Pei Chi-Chi's surname was Pei. It was already a year later when he returned to that person's side. The bad relationship between him and his wife had something to do with her. However, Zhao Kun knew that she wasn't the only woman he had outside. There were men like him who played around, but she had been with him the longest. Tang Yu stared at her for 2 seconds before he walked over and put his arm around her shoulders. His voice was a little hoarse. Why are you wearing so little? I was waiting for you, Pei Chi-Chi said softly. Tang Yu smiled gently and pinched her face. Wait for me. I am very happy. But remember to wear more next time. She nodded obediently and let him carry her to the dining room. A table full of dishes was prepared and steaming hot. He sat down, and Pei Chi-Chi scooped some rice and a bowl of hot soup for him. Chapter 5:11. Her little face rested on his shoulder, and in an instant, warmth filled her entire body. Tang Yu, what's wrong? She asked softly. He didn't reply, but hugged her tighter and buried his face in her warm neck. After a long time, he said, why aren't you eating? She said obediently, I want to wait for you to eat together. Her slender arms wrapped around his muscular waist and hugged him tightly. He lowered his head and searched for her little mouth, kissing it deeply. She moaned softly, her little hands gripping his shirt tightly, and her whole body softened in his arms like water. Their lips and tongues touched, and there was an indescribable lingering feeling. After a long time, he nibbled on her little neck. It was soft and fragrant, and he couldn't bear to let go. Pei Chi-Chi obediently lay in his arms and let him nibble on her. After a while, she felt that he was a little passionate, and she couldn't help but remind him, Tang Yu, it's not convenient. He stopped and looked at her silently for a while. Then, he hugged her with one hand and brought the soup over with the other, feeding her spoonful by spoonful. Since it's not convenient, it's all the more important to make up for it. Pei Chi looked at him eagerly. Aren't you hungry? She motioned for him to drink too. Tang Yu only smiled and fed her a bowl of soup before saying, "You can wait for me in the future, but you can't starve. I'm not a child." She pouted and wanted to continue eating. Tang Yu didn't force her and patted her. Pei Chi sat down next to him, and the two of them ate in silence. After a while, Pei Chi peeked at him secretly. She felt that there was something gloomy between his brows. She didn't dare to ask. She ate obediently, then took a shower and went to sleep. Tang Yu went to the study to handle some work. When he returned to the bedroom, Pei Chi wasn't asleep either. Her long black hair was let loose, and she was wearing cartoon pajamas as she leaned against the headboard, reading a fairy tale book. She was very focused, and she looked like she was about 17 or 18 years old. Tang Yu was a man, a normal man. It could also be said that he was a man with relatively big needs. Moreover, he had a wicked sense of humor. At this moment, she was like a little white rabbit on his bed. If he remained indifferent, then he would not be a man. Of course, Tang Yu didn't forget that Pei Chi was inconvenient. He looked at her silently for a while, then walked to the bathroom. When he came out, his hair was already dry. He lifted the blanket and leaned against the bed like her. He glanced at her lightly before asking softly, "Why did you fall for this?" He thought that she wanted to read a book about business management or something like that. Pei Chi's gaze was still on the fairy tale book. She said casually, "Didn't you say you wanted to get pregnant?" "I'm giving prenatal education in advance." She herself lacked maternal love, so she hoped that her child would be filled with love in the future. Even when she was a penis, she could still feel the love that Mama gave her. Tang Yu was speechless when he saw how serious she was. The dark thoughts that he had in the afternoon had also been washed away. After leaning against him for a while, Pei Chi didn't seem to have any intention of responding to him. She didn't even kiss or hug him. Tang Yu was a little disappointed. He coughed lightly and said, "This should be Daddy's cooperation, right? There's no need." "I'll do it." Pei Chi placed her finger on her belly and smiled sweetly. "The baby is growing in my stomach. I'll just read." Chapter 5:12. Tang Yu raised his eyebrows and carried her over, placing her in his arms. Pei Chi laid in his arms and did not forget to take the fairy tale book from him. She glanced at him and said, "Don't forget." Tang Yu smiled and reached out. His slender fingers caressed her little mouth as he said slowly, "What did you say just now?" Pei Chi held the book and laid in his arms like a little beast. Especially the pajamas that she was wearing made her look even more petite. She looked at him eagerly. "What did I say?" Tang Yu's fingers were still caressing her little mouth slowly as he smiled. "Pei Chi, you said that you only need to be the one to conceive the child." Her little face flushed red instantly as she argued instinctively, "That's not it." He was naughty. "Chi, how are you going to conceive the child without me?" He leaned close to her ear and lectured her naughtily, "Or do you want to take it yourself?" As he said that, he pulled her little hand shamelessly, wanting her to do something naughty. She retracted her hand as though she was scalded. Tang Yu chuckled deeply and teased her, finding it extremely interesting. His gaze fell on the little cow on her pajamas and admired it for a while. He was sure that she was not wearing anything else inside, so it was probably a vacuum. With one hand holding her, he picked up the fairy tale book that was scattered by the side and flipped through it casually. It was the story of Little Red Riding Hood. The big bad wolf ate Little Red Riding Hood into his stomach. His elegant voice sounded very pleasant when he read the fairy tale. Moreover, He was serious and did not sound like he wanted to do anything naughty at all. Pei Chi leaned on his shoulder and looked at him eagerly. She looked up at him and said like a kitten, "Tang Yu, do you like children? Will you tell her stories in the future?" Tang Yu was still flipping through the fairy tale and casually said, "I like them." He rubbed her. "I like the child's mother too." As he spoke, his voice became a little meaningful. "However, I'll only have a child if I let the child's mother fall in love with him, right?" "Not serious at all." She blushed. However, a man and a woman were in a private bedroom, and it was a bedroom like this, so it was reasonable for them to do anything. Tang Yu put down the book in his hand, picked her up, and straightened her up. With a serious face, he said, "Chi-Chi, do we need to practice? This kind of prenatal education is more three-dimensional and vivid." Pei Chi blushed. Practice. Mr. Tang Yu, who had always been aloof and noble, causing countless women in B City to shrink back, smiled faintly. "It's very simple. I'll be the big bad wolf, you'll be Little Red Riding Hood, and I'll eat you up." Pei Chi covered her face. He was too shameless. Really, when this man was shameless, this degree was directly proportional to his IQ in the business world. Shameless. 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 Tang Yu laughed softly. With a stretch of his hand, Little Red Riding Hood's clothes were gone. "Baby, do you think the big bad wolf will wash and eat Little Red Riding Hood before eating her?" He deliberately teased her. How could she be a match for him? Her little body was in his arms, trembling like a little animal. She tried to cover this part, but she failed to cover that part. Tang Yu devoured her from top to bottom, leaving pink marks all over her body. Chapter 513. The fairy tale book was kicked off the luxurious ivory bed and landed on the floor. What happened to the prenatal education? Why did it turn into the male master's sexual education for the female master? After a long time, Pei Chi lay in his arms, panting like a little animal. After a while, she looked for him and bit him. "Tang Yu, you'll teach the child bad things like this." He lowered his head to look at her and said meaningfully, "If you teach the child bad things first, the other child will be bad too." He thought for a while and put on an elitist expression. "Pei Chi, I suddenly realized that it's easier this way. There's no need for prenatal education." Pei Chi was being bullied by him, and she wailed in her heart. Who was the one who said that Tang Yu was cold? Who said that he was cold? He was clearly excited. She placed her little hand on his shoulder and said softly, "Let's stop fooling around, okay?" She lay there softly and looked up. "We're going back tomorrow. Let's sleep, okay?" Tang Yu looked at her and smiled. "Okay." After a while, Pei Chi screamed and her voice was trembling. "Tang Yu, you said you're going to sleep." "Yes." He raised his head and chuckled. "I'm sleeping." Pei Chi was about to cry. He had said he was going to sleep, but why did it become sleeping with her? Perhaps it was because she was going back tomorrow. Even if it was inconvenient for her, he still hugged her and refused to let go. He felt uncomfortable, and she felt uncomfortable too. Finally, Pei Chi took the initiative to crawl under the blanket. Tang Yu was so excited that his voice changed. He reached out and grabbed her little head. "Chi, HM." She answered vaguely, then gritted her teeth. Tang Yu let out a muffled groan and pulled her out of the blanket, kissing her passionately. They were like two fishes intertwined together. Late at night, Pei Chi was so sleepy that her eyelids were struggling. However, Mr. Tang was still in good spirits. He kissed the little thing in his arms, and his voice was bewitching. "Chi, call me Big Brother." "Brother." Pei Chi-Chi's voice was soft and gentle. She leaned into his embrace, looking extremely obedient. Baby, call me Daddy. Pei Chi-Chi's little hand stretched out from under the blanket and slapped his face. Change to tea, Tang Yu coughed lightly. If you don't scream, I can't guarantee that I'll be able to do anything to you. He thought for a moment. Did you eat me just now? Pei Chi-Chi covered her ears. She couldn't bear to listen anymore. Tang Yu finally let her go and pulled her into his arms. Chi-Chi, it's time to sleep. She leaned against his shoulder, her little hand playing with his chin. Really? She asked pitifully. Tang Yu smiled and reached out to press her against his chest. That little ball of warmth seemed to be carved into his body. If you don't want to sleep, I'm fine with it, he said gently, but the content was not gentle at all. Oh, Pei Chi-Chi replied and hugged his neck tightly. Baby is going to sleep, she said childishly. Good night, Daddy. Damn it. He patted her with his big palm and reached out to turn off the light. It was a sweet night. Early the next morning, when Pei Chi-Chi opened her eyes, she saw Tang Yu's enlarged face. Tang Yu went downstairs and waited for her at the dining table. He first flipped through the newspaper, but soon, the faint smile on his face froze. Zhao Ku committed suicide in prison. She tore her clothes into ribbons and hanged herself. The newspaper reported that she was the ex-wife of a famous person, and there was even a wedding photo of Zhao Ku and Tang Ziyuan. Tang Yu leaned against the chair and held his forehead with his fingers. He had a feeling that Zhao Ku was running away from something. Just when he asked who Tang Xian's father was, Zhao Ku committed suicide. Chapter 5:15. When Pei Chi-Chi came downstairs, Tang Yu folded the newspaper and looked up with a smile. Come and have breakfast. She looked at him and sat down beside him. Have some warm milk. He poured a glass for her and watched as she sipped from it. Pei Chi-Chi noticed that he had been watching her. She held the glass in her hand and pouted her pretty lips at him. Her voice was a little coquettish and soft. Tang Yu, why do you keep looking at me? Tang Yu looked at her quietly and stroked her long hair. I just feel that our Chi-Chi has grown up, she replied with an oh, and lowered her head to drink the milk to nourish herself. Actually, Tang Yu knew that she didn't like to drink milk. She was being so obedient now because she wanted their child to be healthier. This was probably because Chi-Chi didn't have maternal love since she was young, so she was very cautious about the arrival of this child. Suddenly, he reached out and pulled her head close to his forehead. Chi-Chi, you have me. He said in a hoarse voice, you have me. She was very close to him, and the man in front of her was incomparably noble. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was a little red. She was also scolding herself in her heart. It wasn't like she hadn't kissed him before. They had done it countless times. She had also seen him naked many times. Why was she still blushing so easily? Her face was so red that she didn't know what to do. However, he didn't tease her anymore. He just continued to stick to her and enjoy the warmth. Pei Chi-Chi hugged his firm waist and felt his muscles tense up. She looked up and called out softly, Tang Yu. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her forehead. All right, it's time for breakfast. I'll send you to the office later. She nodded and obediently ate her breakfast. The newspaper was placed under a small plate next to Tang Yu's hand. After eating, Tang Yu wiped his lips with a napkin and kissed her on the forehead. I'll wait for you in the car. Pei Chi-Chi nodded and went upstairs to get her bag. Tang Yu walked her to the Pei Corporation's building and opened the car door for her. I'll pick you up in the afternoon. Pei Chi-Chi got out of the car and bent down. Don't bother. I can go home myself. He looked at her and said nothing. Suddenly, he moved over, hooked his arm around her little neck, and pulled her into the car. He kissed her little mouth and released her little mouth, but did not let go of her little neck. His voice was a little warm. "I'll ask Uncle Zhao to send you back tonight." She still wanted to say something, but Tang Yu placed his finger on her rosy lips. "Chi-Chi, listen to me. Bossy." She leaned over and bit his lips, then quickly ran away. Tang Yu's eyes were deep in thought as he looked at her back. He picked up his phone and dialed Little Wen's number. Little Wen was completely shocked and she received Boss Tang's call. Oh my God, why was Boss Tang looking for her? Take away all the newspapers in Chi-Chi's office. Chapter 5:16. Under the pressure of Xing Yuan, the news about Zhao Ku was suppressed. There was no more publicity. But because Zhao Ku had no relatives, no one could take care of her funeral except for Tang Ziyuan. No matter what, Tang Axayan was the closest person to her. Although it was a little cruel, Tang Yu could not stop Tang Axayan from seeing Zhao Ku for the last time. Tang Ziyuan originally hated Zhao Ku to the core. But now that she was dead, what else could he do? Tang Ziyuan took care of the funeral for Zhao Ku. Although it was not a big scene, it was not embarrassing. Zhao Ku lay there quietly. Her complexion was ashen. It was impossible to tell that she was as beautiful as she was a dozen years ago. She had been elegant for so long. She could not see that Tang Axayan was out of breath from crying. She could not see, maybe, they could only meet in the future. Zhao Ku lived the first half of her life for herself. She lived the second half for that man. But in the end, that man had finally come to see her. Tang Ziyuan did not want to bear the name of being mean. So, he took care of Zhao Ku's funeral. Shen Lian stood beside Shen Zhongshan. She was dressed in black, but she still looked pretty. After bowing, she stood up and comforted Tang Ziyuan. "Uncle Tang, don't be sad." Tang Ziyuan smiled and looked at Shen Zhongshan. "Zhongshan, I let you see a joke." Shen Zhongshan's eyes fell on Zhao Ku's face. He said calmly, "Maybe this is the best relief for her." Tang Ziyuan sighed and said, only Shen Lian's eyes fell on her father's face. She did not say anything. Relief? Zhao Ku's relief or her father's relief? Before she came, she heard her father and mother arguing downstairs. Her mother's voice was mixed with the same words as before. Little bitch. Vixen. She must be talking about Zhao Ku. Zhao Ku's past. Shen Lian raised her head slightly. Her eyes were fixed on Shen Zhongshan's face. But Shen Zhongshan did not notice. He was a successful man who took good care of himself. He was almost 50 years old but looked like he was in his 40s. When a man was at his most mature and charming. Over the years, although Shen Zhongshan did not have much gossip, there were always one or two female friends around him. Most of them were famous stars and models. They were quite sensible, so the Shen family seemed to be safe and sound. Now, Zhao Ku was dead. It was a good thing. But Shen Lian knew that Shen Zhongshan had been in his study the whole afternoon. It seemed that at least, he had been obsessed with Zhao Ku's body. Dad. Shen Lian held Shen Zhongshan's arm. We should go now. We should go. We should go. Zhao Ku and Tang Ziyuan were already divorced. It was already a great favor for her to visit. It was really inappropriate for her to stay. Shen Zhongshan came back to his senses after hearing Shen Lian's words. He smiled faintly and said, "You and Uncle Tang still have things to talk about. Go find Tang Axayan and comfort her." Of Lian Shen Shen Ku Shen 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 of Shen, so she went upstairs. Of Shen. However, she didn't go upstairs immediately. Instead, she stopped halfway. Because she heard Tang Ziyuan and her father talking about Pei Chichi. What a stupid man. Zhao Ku was dead. Tang Ziyuan did not know who Zhao Ku loved in this life. Originally, Shen Lian did not know either. But Zhao Ku had always been good to her. She had always been with her in Tangyu. She understood everything. Chapter 5:17. There was no one downstairs. Tang Ziyuan said calmly, "Brother Zhongshan, I won't hide it from you." Tang Ziyuan looked at Zhao Ku with sorrow. Zhao Ku hid a lot of things from me, including the fact that she has a daughter. Tang Xin. Shen Zhongshan frowned. Tang Ziyuan sighed, "Not Tang Xin. It's Pei Mingyi's daughter, the girl who's with Tang Yu now." Speaking of Pei Chichi, Tang Ziyuan was very unhappy in his heart. Shen Zhongshan's gaze fell on Tang Ziyuan's face, and his pupils suddenly shrank. After a long time, Shen Zhongshan said with a dry voice, "That girl, is Zhao Ku's?" Tang Ziyuan was immersed in his own pain and didn't notice Shen Zhongshan's strange expression. "Yes." Tang Ziyuan smiled, "She hid it from me." Shen Zhongshan's fingers started to tremble. Zhao Ku's. 21 years ago, Zhao Ku aborted a child for him. Pei Chichi was in her 20s. That child, Shen Zhongshan's face was pale. After a long time, his eyes fell on Zhao Ku's face. If Zhao Ku was alive, he could ask her if Pei Chichi was his child. But Zhao Ku was dead. Tang Ziyuan sighed, "What a sin. Tang Xin is sick. Zhao Ku has committed too many sins in her life, that's why she ended up like this." He paused. She wanted to kill Pei Chichi, but she caused Lin Jinrong to become a vegetable. Tang Ziyuan was depressed. She died in the hands of her own daughter. I think it was Pei Chichi who set her up. What an ill-fated relationship. He and Shen Zhongshan had always had a deep friendship. They used to play together since they were young, and they did not become estranged after that. Besides, he and Zhao Ku were divorced. Tang Ziyuan couldn't tell anyone about this. At this time, he could only tell Shen Zhongshan. Shen Zhongshan's heart skipped a beat and he clenched his fists. Why had he never thought that the child and Zhao Ku would disappear and leave him twice? Tang Xion's age, if she was his child, it would be the right time. When his gaze fell on Tang Ziyuan's face again, it was much more complicated. Of course, with Shen Zhongshan's status, the Shen clan's Jin Taihe was only second to Shen Yuan, so he naturally wouldn't do anything. More than 20 years ago, he refused to have Zhao Ku's child. Even today, when it was proven that Pei Chichi was his child, he would not acknowledge her. He could not have any scandals, nor could he become enemies with Tang Ziyuan. Shen Zhongshan didn't say anything, but he didn't expect that everything was heard by Shen Lian. Shen Lian's face was as calm as water. Now, she finally understood why Zhao Ku disliked Pei Chichi so much. It turned out that not only was she a bastard child born outside, but it was highly likely that she was a bastard child that her father had left in Zhao Ku. How ironic. She and Pei Chichi might actually have the same father but different mothers. Shen Lian hid the shock in her eyes and did not miss the latter part of her father's words. Pei Chichi was the one who sent Zhao Ku to prison. She was the one who plotted it. So, if she told Tang Xian about this, would the consequences be interesting? Pei Chichi loved Tang Xian so much, but Tang Xian looked at her with hatred. Would her heart hurt? Shen Lian walked slowly to Tang Xian's bedroom with a hint of joy. She felt that it was time to let Pei Chichi taste the pain. Chapter 5:18. After work, Pei Chichi got into old Zhao's car and went back to her apartment. She hadn't been to work for a few days, so she was a little tired. She simply ate egg noodles and curled up on the sofa to watch TV. It was a boundless night outside, but her heart was soft. Because she had Tang Axian and Tang Yu, there was a knock on the door. She was stunned and immediately put down the bowl in her hand to open the door. Tang Yu stood at the door, his gaze darker than the night. Pei Chi was stunned and looked up at him. "Why are you here?" He half carried her and brought her inside. The door closed and Tang Yu looked at her quietly. His voice was a little hoarse. "Chi, do you still have any noodles?" "Oh," she replied and looked back. "I've finished eating. I'll make another bowl for you." She reached out and pushed him. "Go take a shower first." However, he hugged her whole, holding her small body in his arms. His breath was so strong that Pei Chi couldn't say a word as she lay on his shoulder. After a long time, Tang Yu let go of her. "I'm going to take a shower. Something simple will do." Pei Chi watched him walk into the bathroom and felt that there was something wrong with him. She went to the kitchen. Although he said to make it simple, she still made his favorite chicken noodles for him. When she was downstairs, Tang Yu came out. There were no clothes for him here, so he only wore a bathrobe after the shower. He hugged her waist from behind and buried his face in her neck. For a moment, the small kitchen was filled with his breath. Pei Chi bit her lip and said in a weak voice, "Tang Yu, I'm downstairs." He tightened his arms and his face was close to hers. "I know." She looked at him and continued to make noodles. "Tang Yu, I think you're a little strange today." She turned her head and glared at him. "Tell me, did you do something wrong? Did you have any contact with any girl, huh?" He smiled. "I wouldn't dare." Pei Chi snorted. "I don't think you dare either." She turned around and bit his neck in a childish manner. She was only willing to bite it lightly. Her gaze fell on it for a long time before she snorted, "I'll leave a mark on you and you won't dare to mess with little girls." Tang Yu forced a smile. "Our Chi is also a young lady." She glared at him and harumphed softly. Just as she was about to take the noodles away, Tang Yu hugged her and said in a deep voice, "Chi, you'll always have me." Pei Chi turned her head back, wanting to look at him, but Tang Yu didn't let her. Her heart sank little by little. Her face was as still as water. After a long time, she asked softly, "Tang Yu, what happened?" His body was turned around and he looked at her seriously. "Zhao Cook committed suicide in prison." He couldn't tell her any more. Pei Chi stared at Tang Yu, her face pale. She looked straight at Tang Yu and said in an uncertain voice, "Tang Yu, what did you say?" Although it was cruel, he still told her. The dead of night was the best time. He held her in his arms and whispered into her ear, "Chi, you still have me." But she couldn't hear it anymore. She only heard that Zhao Cook committed suicide. Pei Chi's voice trembled. "She's dead?" Tang Yu nodded slowly and hugged her tightly, not letting her break free. Chapter 5:19. Blood immediately gushed out, but he stood there, motionless, letting her bite him, letting her vent her anger. Pei Chi couldn't cry. She just bit him and said hoarsely, "Tang Yu, I'm not sad." "Yes, I'm not sad." She lay on his shoulder and said softly. But when she closed her eyes, all she could see was Zhao Ku's face. High and mighty, mean and miserable, it was all about Zhao Ku. Pei Chi lost all her strength. She lay on Tang Yu's shoulder, motionless. After a long time, her tears began to roll down her cheeks. That person hated her, and she hated the person who gave birth to her. But she was the woman who gave birth to her. She stayed in Zhao Ku's stomach for more than 9 months. Zhao Ke was dead. She had no mother. Never again. She didn't even have a chance to be hugged. Pei Chi cried and laughed. She struggled out of Tang Yu's arms, looking a little crazy. Tang Yu, I sent her to prison. She just wanted Zhao Ke to get the punishment she deserved, but she didn't expect Zhao Ke to die. Tang Yu pulled her into his arms, pressing her down forcefully, not letting her escape. Listen to me, Chi, it's not your fault. He pressed her shoulder. Zhao Ke did it for herself. He couldn't tell her what he suspected. He couldn't tell her that Tang Xian wasn't his sister. That way, Pei Chi's existence would be even more unbearable. He looked at her seriously. Pei Chi's expression was blank. After a long time, she said, Tang Yu, is it true? It's true. He hugged her, patting her back with one hand and stroking her long hair with the other. She just wants to be free. Death might be the best release for Zhao Ke. For a woman like her, going to prison was a kind of torture. It was normal for her to leave now. Pei Chi looked at him. She didn't cry anymore. But for the whole night, she was silent and did not make a sound. She still brought the noodles to Tang Yu, but how could he be in the mood to eat? Tang Yu took a few bites and looked at her absent-minded face. Chi. She lowered her eyes. When will she be buried? The day after tomorrow, he answered honestly. Pei Chi didn't say anything else. When they went to bed at night, she didn't make a sound. She quietly lay on his shoulder, thinking about something. Tang Yu did not disturb her. At this moment, he needed a cigarette, but he resisted. He reached out and touched her shoulder. Chi, if you want to cry, you can come into my arms. I don't want to cry, she said hoarsely. After a while, her little body turned around and hugged his waist tightly, leaning into his arms. Her little face was right over his heart, and in a moment he felt it warm and wet. It was a little cold and uncomfortable. But he didn't make a sound and just caressed the little girl. Now, his little girl was so sad. His heart was as heavy as hers. Chapter 520. Tang Yu lowered his head and looked at her tearful face. She had already fallen asleep. His warm fingertips gently wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. He looked at her silently for a long time before carefully placing her in his arms. Chi, everything will be fine tomorrow. Because you still have me. He hugged her for the entire night. He didn't let go. He kept hugging her tightly. Pei Chi woke up when the sky started to brighten. She opened her eyes. They were a little sore and a little bitter. She tugged on his bathrobe and said in a hoarse voice, I want to go and have a look. Tang Yu pursed his lips. It's already been done this morning. I'll take you there in the afternoon. Everything was handled by Tang Ziyuan. Tang Yu did not participate in it. Moreover, Pei Chi's identity was not suitable to attend Zhao Ke's funeral. Pei Chi also knew that. She lowered her head and remained silent. Tang Yu hugged her for a while. Don't go to the office in the morning. She looked up. I'll accompany you. He smiled. Suddenly, Pei Chi threw herself into Tang Yu's arms. She buried her face in his shoulder and said with a trembling voice, Tang Yu, can our child save Tang Xian? Yes. Definitely. He patted her and comforted her. If one can't do it, we'll have to. Pei Chi looked at him. I'm not a pig. I'll turn you into a pig. She leaned on his shoulder again and said softly, Tang Yu, I'm afraid. She was afraid that the people around her would leave her one by one. She was extremely afraid. She tightened her grip and hugged him tightly. Tang Yu reached out and stroked her long hair. His voice was gentle. Don't be afraid. We'll grow old together. When our hair turns white, Chi-Chi, I'll still be able to hug you. Her body was a little weak as she leaned on his shoulder. She closed her eyes and imagined how they would grow old together. She couldn't believe that they could grow old together. She couldn't believe that they could live to the end like a normal married couple. Tang Yu held her little face and said firmly, "We will. Chi-Chi, we will." He kissed her, without any feelings, just tenderly kissing her pitiful little body. The whole morning, he just accompanied her and did nothing. In the afternoon, Tang Yu drove Pei Chi-Chi to the cemetery. The sky was gloomy. When Pei Chi-Chi got out of the car, she looked at the boundless cemetery and sighed. Because Pei Mingyi was also buried here. No matter how much Xiao Ku didn't want to see him, they were buried together after death. Pei Chi-Chi was dressed in black and wore a pair of sunglasses on her pale face. She held a bunch of white chrysanthemums in her hands as she followed Tang Yu to the new grave. In the photo, Xiao Ku's youthful beauty was used. Her features were picturesque, and there was not a single part of her that was not exquisite. Even though it was just a photo, it showed how arrogant she was. Pei Chi-Chi squatted down and placed the white chrysanthemum in front of Xiao Ku's tombstone. It was erected in Tang Xian's name. Pei Chi-Chi's name was not there. Yes, in Xiao Ku's heart, there was no Pei Chi-Chi. From the beginning to the end, she never wanted to acknowledge her. She stood up slowly and looked at the photo. She said softly, "If you didn't look for me and didn't let me leave Tang Yu, maybe things wouldn't have turned out this way." She would rather never know who her mother was.